Everyone at the airport stared as the billionaire's kid screamed nonstop. But when a poor black waitress walked over and did the unthinkable, she didn't just silence the cries, she changed all their lives forever. Althea Johnson was 20 years old, a woman carrying more weight on her shoulders than her thin frame should ever bear. She had grown up in the South, raised by her grandmother after her parents disappeared into the haze of broken promises. Life had hardened her, but it never took away her softness, that quiet tenderness that still lived inside. On this particular day, she was just another tired worker trying to make it through a shift at the airport food court. The air smelled of coffee, fried food, and impatience. People rushed, argued, dragged heavy bags, and cursed delayed flights. Across the terminal stood Gregory Stanton, a billionaire whose face appeared on magazine covers, but here he looked like a man under siege. His son, no more than 6, screamed without pause, his cries echoing above the announcements and footsteps. The boy's small body shook with frustration, his father's cold attempts to hush him failing with each passing second. Wealth and power seemed useless against the piercing sound of a child who wanted comfort. Travelers stared, some annoyed, others sympathetic, but no one dared step forward. Althea froze in place, her tray of empty cups rattling in her trembling hands. That boy's crying ripped her heart open, dragging her back to nights when her baby brother wailed the same way, nights she could never forget, because those cries ended in silence no lullaby could break. Her chest rose heavy as the boy's screams grew louder, his father's voice sharper, his patience thinner. Then, almost without thinking, Althea set the tray down. Step by step, she moved toward the billionaire's son, her heart pounding so loud she feared the entire airport would hear it. She reached out, ready to do the unthinkable. And Gregory Stanton's eyes locked on her like knives. Long before the airport, Althea's story had already been written in pain. She lived in a cramped apartment with her grandmother, Evelyn, whose frail hands and tired eyes still carried strength enough to guide her. Evelyn had raised Althea with wisdom and discipline, teaching her that kindness was a currency far richer than money. But kindness didn't pay rent. It didn't buy food. It didn't keep collectors from banging on their door. Althea worked endless shifts at Melvin's Diner, a greasy spoon where the smell of bacon clung to her uniform long after she left. Customers came and went, some tipping a smile, others tossing insults sharp enough to slice through her spirit. Still, she held her chin high, carrying plates like they were shields against a world that never wanted her to win. She dreamed of becoming a teacher, of standing in a classroom where children would see her not as a servant but as a guide. That dream, however, seemed as unreachable as the moon she stared at through cracked windows. One night, after 12 hours on her feet, a white customer sneered at her, throwing a few coins on the table. "You people should be grateful you have jobs," he muttered. Althea forced a smile, but her heart bled inside. The manager, instead of defending her, accused her of being rude and fired her on the spot. Just like that, years of loyalty ended with the slam of a door. Unemployed and desperate, Althea turned to temporary jobs, grasping at whatever she could find to keep her grandmother's medicine stocked. It was one of those short-term gigs that placed her in the airport food court, apron tied around her waist, when fate decided to collide her path with Gregory Stanton. And as Gregory's glare burned into her, she realized this meeting could change everything. Gregory Stanton was a man whose very name commanded respect. At 45, he was the head of Stanton Global, a billion-dollar empire stretching across industries. His world was yachts, skyscrapers, and silent boardrooms where his voice was law. But behind the polished suits and magazine covers hid a man gnawed by loneliness and bitterness. His marriage had crumbled 3 years earlier, leaving scars that even money couldn't hide. His ex-wife, Madison, lived in another state, and their son Leo was caught in the crossfire of broken vows. Gregory believed discipline could replace affection, but Leo believed otherwise. The boy barely spoke to his father, retreating into silence and bursts of tears whenever they were together. Gregory mistook that silence for weakness, never realizing it was his own coldness building the walls. When the custody court demanded Gregory spend more time with his son or risk losing him entirely, his pride forced compliance. A critical business trip loomed, and Leo had to come along, whether he wanted to or not. Gregory saw it as an inconvenience, another obstacle to control. He never imagined it would be the mirror reflecting his failures back at him. At the airport, as his son's cries tore through the air, Gregory felt the eyes of strangers judging him, mocking him, stripping away his carefully built image. His power meant nothing here. He wanted silence, obedience, control. But Leo gave him only chaos. Then, through the blur of his own frustration, he saw her. A woman in a faded apron, eyes filled with something unfamiliar to him, compassion. She moved closer, her hands trembling but steady enough to reach for his child. Gregory's heart hardened instantly. He would not allow a stranger, a waitress of all people, to expose his weakness. Yet she did not stop. The hum of rolling suitcases and the buzz of impatient travelers filled the airport terminal, but Althea heard none of it. Her entire focus was on the small boy whose face was streaked with tears, his cheeks red from the effort of crying. Something deep within her, older than her own pain, called her to move forward. She knew she should not. She knew the rules: don't touch, don't interfere, don't cross the invisible line between service worker and wealthy traveler. But rules had never quieted a child's broken sobs. Each step forward felt heavier, as though the eyes of the crowd were pressing against her back. She remembered her brother Marcus, whose cries once filled their tiny house with the same desperate rhythm. She remembered holding him, rocking him, whispering songs until his eyes finally closed. Marcus never made it past his 3rd birthday. His absence was a wound that never healed, and every cry she heard since was like salt poured onto it. Althea paused beside Gregory Stanton, who towered over her like an unmovable wall. His tailored suit, his rigid jaw, his furious stare, all screamed power. Yet none of it could calm the child clinging to him, thrashing against his grip. The boy's voice cracked with exhaustion, yet he wailed on, searching for a comfort his father couldn't give. Althea's hand hovered in the air, her fingers inches away from the boy's shoulder. She whispered a prayer under her breath, asking for courage, asking for forgiveness if this ruined her life. And then she touched him. The boy's wails caught in his throat, his sobs shrinking into soft hiccups as his wide eyes locked onto hers. The terminal fell strangely quiet, as though the world itself was waiting to see what happened next. Gregory's fury rose like fire. Althea bent down, her face level with the boy's, and began to hum. The sound was soft at first, barely audible over the hum of the airport, but it carried a warmth that wrapped around the child like a blanket. It was the same lullaby her grandmother used to sing, the same melody that once eased her brother into peaceful dreams. Words flowed next, simple and old, each note carrying a piece of her heart. The boy's trembling slowed. His cries dwindled into whispers, then silence. He blinked, tears still fresh on his cheeks, and before anyone could understand what was happening, he reached his small arms toward Althea, burying his face against her shoulder. Gasps rose from the crowd. Phones lifted into the air, recording, capturing the moment a poor waitress did what a billionaire could not. Gregory's face turned red, not with relief, but with humiliation. His son, his flesh and blood, clung to a stranger like she was safety itself. He saw the cameras flashing, the strangers whispering, the judgment carving into his pride. His empire was built on power, on control, on never appearing weak. And here he was, exposed by a woman in an apron. Althea held the boy gently, her eyes wet with emotion she tried to hide. She hadn't meant to step into his world, hadn't meant to become part of his story. But now she was here, and the boy's tiny arms refused to let go. Gregory's voice cut through the silence, sharp as a blade. "Put him down!" The command was not a request but an order, laced with rage. The cameras kept recording, the crowd kept staring, and Althea felt the ground beneath her shift. She had calmed the child. But she had awakened a storm far greater than she could imagine. The airport went silent, then erupted. Strangers clapped, cheered, and raised their phones high, eager to post what they just witnessed. A billionaire's child calmed by a poor waitress? It was a story too good for the internet to ignore. Within minutes, headlines began to spread. Waitress saves CEO's son at airport. The crowd's applause felt like a dagger in Gregory Stanton's chest. He was not a man used to being overshadowed, especially by someone's society labeled beneath him. Althea's heart raced as she handed the boy back. She expected gratitude, or at least relief, but Gregory's eyes were fire. He muttered something under his breath, words laced with venom. She felt the heat of his humiliation pressing down on her, and for a moment, she regretted ever stepping forward. By the time Althea slipped away, her phone buzzed with messages from strangers who had already found her name tag in the video. Some praised her courage. Others mocked her, saying she just wanted attention. The internet, like always, split itself into two sharp sides. Gregory, meanwhile, sat in the airport lounge, seething. Investors texted him, some laughing, others asking who the woman was. His lawyer warned him. "Your image is crumbling. You need to control the story." Gregory clenched his fists, furious that his life's work could be shaken by a single waitress with a song. His son, however, clung to that memory, whispering for the woman who had soothed him. Gregory knew one thing: this wasn't over. The next morning, Althea's phone rang. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a friend. It was a lawyer representing Gregory Stanton. He wanted to meet. Althea sat nervously in the gleaming lobby of Stanton Global, surrounded by glass walls and marble floors that seemed too clean, too cold. She was out of place, her thrift store dress clashing with the suits rushing past. But she sat tall, determined not to let them see her fear. Inside the boardroom, Gregory entered like a storm. His presence swallowed the air, his silence heavy with unspoken contempt. The board of directors was already there, some curious, some skeptical, all waiting to see this waitress who had made their boss look weak. One by one, questions came. "What did you do to calm him? Were you trying to stage a scene?" Althea answered with honesty, her voice steady, her eyes unflinching. She explained the song, the memory of her brother, the instinct that had guided her. Some nodded, impressed by her sincerity. Gregory, however, tapped his pen impatiently, his jaw clenched tight. Leo sat quietly at the far end of the table, his small hands folded. The boy's eyes, however, never left Althea. He smiled shyly when their eyes met, a spark of trust shining between them. And when someone asked if he wanted to see her again, Leo's voice, soft but certain, broke through. "Yes." The board members exchanged glances. One of them leaned back, smirking, and said the words Gregory least expected. "Maybe she should stay close to him. Hire her as his nanny." The room fell silent. Gregory's pride screamed no. His son's hopeful eyes whispered yes. Althea held her breath, unsure if this suggestion would change her life, or ruin it. And in that silence, Gregory's next move would decide everything. The offer came like poison wrapped in gold. Gregory Stanton himself, His voice flat, extended the job to Althea. A nanny position. Temporary. Generous pay. His tone carried no respect, only control. To him, this was a way to silence critics, to repair his image, to keep the world from laughing at him again. Althea's chest tightened. The thought of stepping into his world made her stomach churn. She had seen the disdain in his eyes, the coldness that poured from his very being. To serve him, to care for his child under his roof, felt unbearable. But then she thought of Evelyn, her grandmother, who was weeks behind on medicine. The eviction notice pinned to their door. The dreams of teaching that grew dimmer by the day. She didn't want to say yes. Pride screamed at her to walk away. But survival whispered otherwise. She swallowed hard and lifted her chin. "If I do this," she said firmly, "you will treat me with respect." Gregory's lip twitched in annoyance, but the board's eyes were on him, waiting. He gave a tight nod, though his glare promised this would not be easy. Later that night, Althea sat at her kitchen table, staring at the contract. She signed, knowing the ink carried more than a job. It carried danger, judgment, and the weight of a billionaire's wrath. The next morning, she packed her single suitcase, kissed her grandmother's hand, and boarded the car waiting outside. She didn't know what waited at the Stanton mansion. But she knew one thing for sure: her life would never be the same again. The Stanton mansion stood like a castle, its iron gates swinging open to reveal endless lawns, fountains, and walls that seemed to whisper of power. Althea's chest tightened as she stepped inside, her thrift store shoes tapping against marble floors polished like mirrors. Staff members watched her with thin smiles, some hiding smirks, others glaring with open disdain. She heard whispers, words like charity case and temporary help, slicing through her ears. Althea kept her head high, but her stomach twisted. The weight of judgment pressed down on her harder than the chandelier above. Leo, however, ran to her the moment she arrived. His small hands tugged at hers, pulling her to see his toys, his room, his world. For the first time, his laughter filled the halls, bouncing off walls that had grown used to silence. The staff noticed. So did Gregory. At night, when Althea tucked Leo into bed, she sang softly, the same lullaby from the airport. Gregory, walking past the door, froze. He had not heard his son laugh like this in years. He leaned against the wall, listening, his jaw tight, his chest heavy with something he refused to name. But pride was stubborn, and Gregory's heart was colder than marble. He stormed into his office, pouring himself a drink, convincing himself she was a problem, not a blessing. Yet even as he told himself that, he couldn't ignore what he had seen, his son smiling, because of her. And that realization shook him more than he was willing to admit. The days stretched into weeks, tension filling the Stanton mansion like smoke. Gregory and Althea clashed at every turn. She challenged him in ways no one ever dared, calling out his arrogance, questioning his choices, forcing him to see the cracks in his own armor. He despised it, yet some part of him needed it. One night, after another argument over Leo's bedtime, Gregory snapped. "You think you know better than me? You're a waitress. Don't forget that." The words dripped with venom, but Althea's eyes did not flinch. She answered softly, "Maybe I don't have your money, but I know what love looks like. And so does your son." The words cut deep, sharper than any knife. For the first time, Gregory felt something he hadn't in years: shame. He shut the door, his reflection in the glass taunting him with the truth he fought to bury. The very next morning, another storm arrived. Madison, Gregory's ex-wife, appeared at the mansion gates, heels clicking against the driveway. Her smile was sharp, her eyes filled with fire. She had one goal: to destroy Gregory's custody case. And now she had the perfect weapon, Althea. She accused Gregory of hiring a stranger, a poor woman, to raise their son. She threatened to take Leo away forever, using Althea as proof of his recklessness. Gregory's pride crumbled, replaced by fury. He turned on Althea, his words cruel, his decision swift. "You're fired." The words echoed through the mansion, leaving Althea shattered, Leo screaming, and the walls themselves holding their breath for what would come next. The slam of Gregory's voice still echoed in the mansion halls. "You're fired." The words hit Althea like a stone to the chest. She packed her bag in silence, her heart heavy as Leo clung to her legs, begging her not to leave. His cries reminded her of that day in the airport. Only this time there was no lullaby strong enough to soothe him. Back in her apartment, Althea sat at the kitchen table, staring at the peeling wallpaper. She felt the sting of betrayal. After everything she had given, after all the love she poured into a boy who wasn't hers, she was discarded like nothing. But she told herself she was used to this. The world had never rewarded her kindness, it punished it. Meanwhile, the Stanton mansion grew colder. Leo stopped eating. He refused to sleep. His toys remained untouched, his laughter gone. Gregory, for all his wealth, could not fix it. The boy's small voice cut through the silence one night. "I want Althea." Gregory's chest ached, but his pride built walls around his heart. He told himself he didn't need her, didn't need anyone. But the truth screamed louder with every passing day. Without Althea, he was losing his son. And then, one evening, the sound of glass shattering pulled Gregory into Leo's room. He found his boy curled up on the floor, pale and weak, refusing food, refusing water, refusing comfort. Gregory reached for him, but Leo turned away, whispering through cracked lips, "I want her." Gregory realized he had made the worst mistake of his life. Gregory Stanton was a man who never begged. Yet pride melted into desperation when his son's health began to slip through his hands. He drove to Althea's apartment, knocking on her door with the force of a man drowning. When she opened it, his eyes burned, but not with rage, this time with fear. He asked her to return. Althea's heart wavered, but pain had taught her caution. She shook her head, saying she was tired of being tossed aside, tired of being used when it was convenient. Gregory pleaded, but she closed the door, her chest aching from the weight of choice. Inside, Evelyn sat weak in her chair, coughing until her hands shook. Hospital bills piled high on the counter, their edges curled with reminders of how close they were to losing everything. Althea tried to stay strong, but tears stained her cheeks as she held her grandmother's fragile hand. Meanwhile, Gregory made a decision that went against every fiber of his pride. Quietly, anonymously, he paid every one of Evelyn's hospital bills. He told no one, not even Althea. For once, his wealth was not a weapon but a shield. Althea noticed the hospital's sudden kindness, the bills disappearing as though swallowed by the wind. She didn't know how, but something about it felt like Gregory's shadow. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself she didn't care. But deep down, a seed of doubt grew. Maybe the man who once humiliated her was not as unmovable as she believed. And then, just as her heart began to settle, her phone rang again, this time with news that would turn everything upside down. The voice on the line was Gregory's attorney. He spoke quickly, explaining the custody trial was days away, and Leo's condition was only getting worse. Without her, Gregory would lose not only his son but himself. The lawyer begged her to testify, to stand by Gregory, to give Leo the stability the court demanded. Althea's first instinct was anger. Why should she help the man who had torn her apart? But then she thought of Leo, the boy who held her hand when he was scared, the boy who laughed at her songs, the boy who once whispered, "You feel like home." She agreed, not for Gregory, but for the child. In court, the air was sharp with judgment. Madison stood tall, her expensive dress gleaming under the lights. She painted Gregory as cold, unfit, too prideful to raise a son alone. Her words cut deep, but Gregory remained silent, his eyes fixed on Leo. When it was Althea's turn, she spoke with trembling honesty. She told the court how Leo needed love, how money could not replace comfort, how even the smallest kindness could change a child's world. Some eyes softened, others hardened. Then, the moment came that silenced the entire room. The judge asked Leo where he wanted to live. The boy stood, his voice small but unshakable. He pointed toward Althea. "I want to stay with her." The courtroom gasped. Gregory's face drained of color. Madison's smirk shattered. And for the first time in his life, Gregory Stanton felt powerless in the face of truth. The courtroom erupted. Lawyers argued, cameras flashed, and Madison's voice rose like thunder. But the judge, calm and steady, raised a hand to silence them. He leaned forward, his gaze sharp on Gregory. "You may have wealth, Mr. Stanton. But do you have love?" Gregory's mask cracked. For years, he had hidden behind walls of money and pride. But here, before the world, those walls crumbled. His voice broke as he admitted his failures, how he had failed as a husband, as a father, as a man. He confessed he didn't know how to love the right way, but he wanted to learn. Madison scoffed, her face red with fury. She stormed out, her heels clicking like gunshots. The crowd whispered as Gregory lowered his head, humbled at last. The judge made his decision. Custody would remain with Gregory, but with conditions. Leo's well-being demanded more than wealth. Althea, though not family by blood, was named his guardian figure. She was to remain in his life, not as an employee, but as someone the court recognized as vital to the child's happiness. The words stunned everyone. Gregory looked at Althea, his pride shattered, his heart bare. She looked back, unsure if this was justice or another trap. But Leo smiled, and in that smile, the truth was clear. This was not about Gregory, not about Madison. It was about him. And as the gavel struck, sealing their fates, a new story began, one none of them expected. Months passed, and the mansion was no longer cold. Laughter returned, filling the rooms with echoes of life. Gregory had changed, not overnight, but step by step, learning what it meant to be more than a CEO. He spent mornings helping Leo with homework, evenings listening instead of commanding, nights apologizing when he stumbled. Althea's life transformed too. With Gregory's quiet support, she returned to school, finishing the degree she had once abandoned. Soon, she stood in a classroom, chalk in hand, her dream of teaching no longer a wish but reality. Her grandmother's name was honored through scholarships Gregory funded, though he never took credit, never sought applause. The bond between them all deepened, not by force, but by choice. Leo, once the boy who cried nonstop, grew brighter, braver, and happier. And on one particular evening, during his school play, the moment came that tied their stories together forever. As the curtain closed, Leo ran from the stage, past the clapping parents, straight into the arms of Althea. Gregory watched, his eyes wet, his heart no longer hardened. Then Leo turned, pulling Gregory close too. The three stood together, billionaire, waitress, child, not bound by money or status, but by love, the only currency that mattered. The boy who once cried without end now smiled without fear. And in that smile was the proof that kindness, even when small, can rewrite the story of an entire life. Stories like this remind us that kindness is more powerful than money. If this touched your heart, don't just scroll away. Hit that subscribe button and join us for more real, emotional stories that will keep you thinking long after the video ends. And hey, if you believe kindness can change the world, share this video with someone who needs the reminder today.